here to talk about scholarships and bursaries. And there will be plenty of time, I hope, at the end for your questions, although I am going to try and cover as much of the sort of nuts and bolts to do with scholarships and bursaries in what I say to you. And I'm just going to start by talking a little bit about the one thing that probably you won't have heard too much about yet, which is money. Independent education in the UK is for most people unthinkable because it's too expensive. And the most expensive boarding school in this country will now cost you over £42,000 per year for each child. That's when the average salary in the UK today is £26,500. So it's a rich person's thing, isn't it? School fees have risen disproportionately to incomes and even to London house prices over the last 20 years. However, the cost of educating your child independently varies enormously, and the biggest variation is between different areas of the UK. Average fees, I'm going to blind you a little bit with numbers at the start, but it's probably worthwhile. Average fees for day schools in the North, Wales, Scotland and Midlands are around £3,500 a term. But for day schools in the Southwest, East Anglia, Southeast, London are around £4,400 a term, so 25% more. Now that gives you something to think about even before you start thinking about fee assistance. Average fees for boarding schools in Wales, Scotland, the Midlands and East Anglia and the North are around £9,400 a term. But in the Southeast and the Southwest and London, £10,700. So, average obviously means that some are cheaper, and some prep schools, believe it or not, some prep schools in the North East would educate your child for under £7,000 a year. The cheapest prep school in London will be almost £2,000 a year more than this. Westminster School in London will cost you nearly £28,000 a year for a day place and more than £36,000 a year for a boarding place. However, a place in a good senior school not far from London, certainly within commuting distance, can cost a lot less. For example, the oldest school in the country and one of the loveliest, King's School Rochester, will take your child as a day pupil for £18,000 or as a boarder for £29,000 per annum. And Rochester is under an hour from London by train. So, even before you start to think about getting help with school fees for all the wonderful schools downstairs you've been looking at, it can be worth shopping around and also asking yourselves whether you need to live in London. Increasingly, we find ourselves advising families who decide that if they move out of London, living expenses will be so much lower that they can afford to consider independent schools, which will be cheaper for the most part out of the capital anyway. So I just wanted to make that point before I started talking about scholarships and bursaries. And we could talk at length about why independent schools are so expensive, but now isn't the time for that. Many parents ask us, some of you today have asked us, is it worth spending all that money? And of course much depends on what state school options you have close by you. And do bring this up in questions afterwards if you want to. But you have come to this show, which means you are interested in independent schools, and you've come to hear me and Ben, which means you want to know about the fees for these schools and whether you might be able to get any help in paying for them. So let's pitch in to what scholarships and bursaries are all about. Now, the term you will hear is fee assistance. That covers both scholarships and bursaries, and you'll hear that most often from schools and see it on their websites. And I'm going to start, just before I get into more detail, by giving you a few more statistics. Almost a third of pupils, that's over 160,000, at independent schools at the moment have some kind of fee reduction in the shape of a scholarship or a bursary. These schools now devote more than £850 million a year to fee assistance. £850 million, that's just to fee assistance. So, I mean, it's an enormous business, independent education. That's what they're giving away. So it gives you some idea of the size of the business that independent education now is in this country. Nearly 5,500 pupils are on full bursaries. That means they pay no fee at all. There are some academically selective independent schools in London which have up to 10% of their pupils on 100% fee assistance. In other words, they get their entire education at these schools for nothing, plus in some cases help with uniform and trips. However, obviously most recipients of fee assistance are helped a lot less than this, and I think we do need to be very clear about this, and this is the last bit of statistics I'm going to give you. Around 25% of those on some sort of fee assistance get between 1% and 25% of fees. The next 30% get between 25 and 50% of the fees. The next 16% get between 51% and 75% of the fees. It's getting smaller all the time. And 13% get between 75% and 100% of the fees. So, however, before we all get too excited about this, I want to stress two very important principles. At the moment, of the more than 500,000 children currently educated independently, only 1% pay no fees at all. So those of you who are sitting hoping for 100% bursaries, you have to take that into account. It's a wonderful thing to aim at, but only 1% of children at independent schools pay no fees at all. 2, no one, and I hate to sound harsh, but it's a reality that you need to take on if you're going to start thinking along these lines. No one owes you or your child any financial help. However bright, talented, saintly, handsome and adorable your child inevitably is, you must always approach any application for fee assistance with care and the expectation that you are unlikely to succeed. And I'll explain more about why this is so in a few minutes. However, I don't want to put anybody off. A realistic, careful application can be life-changing, and we have seen it many times being just that. So, what are scholarships and bursaries, and what are the do's and don'ts around applying for them? What's the difference between them? Scholarships. Historically, these were rewards for excellence, and they were worth much more in money terms in the ancient, well-endowed schools, the really posh schools that you all have heard of, like Eton and Harrow and so on. Old boys would leave large legacies to fund scholarships in, for example, their favourite subjects, or to support children in the clergy or people in the services, or for example, the Navy or the Army. Some of these were worth considerable contributions to the fees. Others were really only for glory. You got your name on the board and enough money to cover your Snickers bar on the way home from school. This was especially true of girls' schools, simply because few of them had been going for anything like as long as the ancient public schools in this country. And women seldom had great riches with which to endow these schools. Now, scholarships still persist, and they are an important way for academic schools to attract bright pupils who will do them credit in exams and make a strong intellectual contribution to school life. They also offer scholarships in other things that enhance the overall quality of school life: music, sports and arts and drama, and I'm sure most of you will be aware of this. However, in recent years there has been a strong move across the whole independent school sector to shift their fee assistance away from scholarships, which can so often go to the families of children who could well afford to pay the full fee, and they go to bursaries, which are means tested. In other words, your income and a whole lot of other circumstances, which I'll talk about now, are taken into account. Bursaries. Your child takes the same academic entrance test as everyone else to get a place in the school, but both you and the school know from the outset that there is no way you could accept a place, if offered, without some help with the fees. You tell your school this at the outset, and it has to be made clear, this is really important, it has to be made clear to your child as well, because the very last thing you would want for your clever son or daughter is to be offered a place at the school of their dreams, and then you have to tell them they can't go there because you can't afford it and the school will not give you enough help. So it always has to be done with that in mind, and that realism is really important about this. Now, bursaries, as we've said, are means tested. The school will ask for full disclosure of your financial circumstances. This includes your family income, your assets, for example, properties you own, but also your commitments. They will want also to know about your lifestyle. It can sometimes be the case that you have a surprisingly high family income, but if you have inescapable financial commitments, for example, you're responsible for maintaining 2 sets of elderly parents in a care home, or you have several other children, maybe with particular needs or whatever, you can still often qualify for some fee assistance. But if you take several holidays every year, if you have a second home, or a pony, or a string of rental properties, or a yacht, in addition to your double income, you are unlikely to receive much, if any, help. The crucial thing is to be scrupulously honest and open about your circumstances. The second last thing you want is for your child to be doing brilliantly at school on a bursary, and the school discovers that you have not disclosed your true income and your child has to leave through no fault of their own. And I've had to deal with that once or twice, and honestly, it's not somewhere you want to be. The value of a bursary will be reassessed each year. Now, this can be tricky if you're the sort of person whose income is not regular. Perhaps you work on short-term contracts or different projects. It may be that one year you earn more than you did before, or you must then expect the school to reduce your fee assistance. On the other hand, if you hit hard times, and many people who work for themselves or who are on unpredictable short-term contracts often have unpredictable or sporadic incomes, then the school will often help if it can, and allow you maybe to spread your payments, or will even up the bursary if it can. Sometimes, and this is a question I've been asked a lot this weekend, if a child does exceptionally well in an entrance test or a scholarship exam, and some schools set special exams for scholarship candidates, your child will be offered perhaps an academic scholarship which can then be topped up with a bursary, so that the two together make it possible for you to accept a place. So you can have both, it's not one or the other. How much might you get? This is not something I or anyone can tell you. Schools differ widely in how they make these decisions, and of course in the amount of money they have for such purposes. And they will not usually disclose how they make these judgments, and they are not obliged to do so. Some schools will consider families with a surprisingly high overall income. There's been a lot of publicity lately about St Paul's Boys' School, which most of you will know about, especially if you have boys, because they will now consider people whose family income is as high as £120,000 a year. Which is a hell of an income, isn't it, for most people? But it's not uncommon enough in London to qualify you these days as seriously rich, while other schools, as I said above, will only consider those with a much lower than average income. And this is often because of the way their charitable foundation operates. There are no fixed rules, and you will only find out by asking. So, how do you find out who offers what? And there are various things you can do. If you know the schools you are interested in, you can look at their websites. Some schools tell you a lot about their fee assistance, most tell you very little. You can call them up, but many parents feel a bit reluctant to call them up when they have no idea what sort of reception they're going to get and whether they're anywhere near being able to qualify. The HMC, the Headmasters and Mistresses Conference, the professional association of most independent schools, now publishes a useful list of most of their schools, telling you in broad terms which school offers what. It's useful, but if you don't know which schools are near you or what suits you and your child in other ways, it's not that much help. The Girls' Schools Association produces nothing at all, and the Independent Schools Council website has a search facility which frankly doesn't work very well. And it's very frustrating. The schools themselves are keen to attract bright, talented children of less well-off families. Of course, that's what they want. That's what gives them their reputation. But their professional bodies, I'm sad to say, are not good at helping them do so. Now, because of this, we at the Good Schools Guide began around 5 years ago to contact the actual schools, all of whom had said to us they desperately wanted this kind of publicity for their fee assistance, to ask for their information, their criteria, their systems, and when they would tell us, the money. And everything parents wanted to know when it comes to getting a scholarship or a bursary or both. And we now hold information on about 740 independent schools, and all the information that they will give in the UK. So it'll be all the schools that you are interested in, I'm sure. We now have this information, so you can ask us. And it is the only data bank of this information, which is extraordinary, but there you go. We do make a charge if we search on your behalf. We have to cover the cost of the research and keeping it up to date and the time it takes to find what you want us to find, but it's really not much in relation to the potential gains. In fact, I always quote the parent who wrote to us a couple of years ago who gained 100% bursary at Latimer Upper School for her son, and she wrote, "At the time you charged me £180 for the search. I thought I was mad to do it, but now we have this amazing opportunity. It feels like the cost of a sandwich to what we are getting." And you know, she's not by any means alone, I'm glad to say. So do come and talk to us later to discuss possibilities. Now, I haven't got very much longer. I've got 10 important points I do want to make to help you think seriously about this. 1, and I'm going to be a bit brutal, so steel yourself. Your child may be top of everything in his little state primary. This does not necessarily mean he's a genius. And it does not necessarily mean that he will qualify for any financial help at any school. You have to bear in mind that he or she will be competing not just for a place, but for financial help against the brightest from a great many similar schools, but also against the children who have been at prep schools who owe their continuance and their existence to success in getting places at these schools. 2. Schools are completely autonomous when it comes to awarding fee assistance. They all have their own criteria. Some are much richer than others. They often have to make hard choices between, for example, awarding 100% scholarship or bursary to one child who is absolutely brilliant, or possibly 25% to 4 really able children, or maybe 10% to 10 children who they'd love to have. I mean, it's a difficult thing, and these choices have to be made every year. 3, no school owes you a scholarship or a bursary, and you should always approach any such application in a spirit of let's give it a try. Always make sure you have other options that will not keep you awake at night with worry. 4, get your administration right. Make sure you apply in exactly the way the school tells you. All the details will be on their website. Never be afraid of calling them up if you're not sure. And part of that is 5, do not miss deadlines. Most good schools are hugely oversubscribed. There's no reason why they should look at you if you apply late. And each school sets its own deadlines. For year 7 and year 9 entry, this can sometimes be years in advance. So get your admin right. 6, most schools are happy to chat to you if you think your child might be a scholarship or bursary candidate. Don't be afraid to call up the admissions department and ask if you can come in for a chat. But do make it clear that fee assistance is what you want to talk about. And don't pick the busiest times of the year when they're doing the entrance tests or something like that. You will be less welcome. 7, don't argue with the school's admin staff. No school is keen to take parents who at the outset identify themselves as difficult. If you have a genuine reason for feeling that they have messed up or lost your application, and it can happen, write a reasonable, factual letter to the head, but don't harangue them over the phone, because frankly there'll be a line through your child through no fault of your child. 8, and maybe this might be the most important one, do not pressurize your child. He or she will not perform better for being stressed or for feeling that the rest of your life and all your future pride and happiness in them depends on passing some exam and deserving fee assistance from any one school. The more you encourage them, tell them how lucky any school would be to get them, the better they will perform, the more confident they'll be. 9, be realistic. I remember once having a client who told me that she couldn't send all 3 of her children to a boarding school without bursaries for each of them. Great, sounded fine, until I started to ask a few more questions and learned that they had 3 homes, a stables and a yacht. And be realistic the other way. Don't accept a place with some fee assistance if it's going to mean you can't afford to feed your child when she gets home. You need, as far as possible, to look ahead and think about your overall quality of life. Right. I'm going to finish with just some quirky things about scholarships and bursaries and fee assistance generally. There are all sorts of other things apart from scholarships and bursaries. You can get reductions for siblings. Girls' schools now have made considerable efforts to accumulate money in bursary funds, particularly the Girls' Day School Trust. And those of you who live in South London will know that there are a lot of Girls' Day School Trust schools there, and they've now got quite a lot of money. There are bursaries and scholarships at specific schools for people who live in particular areas. For example, Lincolnshire, Nottinghamshire, Leicestershire, Derbyshire, the London Borough of Harrow, and the Isle of Wight. There is specific help for children, for example, from Kenya or from Russia. There are various other things which are not necessarily very helpful to you, and I'm trying to rush. There are some specific scholarships for parents, for children of parents who have specific occupations: chemists, commercial travellers, grocers, fishmongers, licensed drinks trade workers. There are odd scholarships and bursaries for people with divorced parents, people who can play the bagpipes. Anybody here? One or two. There's an environmental awareness scholarship. There's one or two chess scholarships. We were asked about that yesterday. There are a few scholarships for orphans. And we are noticing a trend away from the traditional scholarship subjects. We're now getting scholarships offered in dance, football, basketball, athletics, golf, netball, riding, rugby, swimming, sailing, tennis, and so on. There are more dramatic art scholarships, creative art scholarships, photography, and we've just come across a scholarship for a girl with character and integrity. More and more scholarships in science and engineering and technology, especially at sixth form levels. There are also charitable foundations which help people in particular difficulties, for example with health problems and bereavement. All sorts of one-off scholarships for example, children of the military. We hold details on all this information. Final point, the importance of informing yourselves. It's the only way of being sure that it's worth applying and that you are doing it in the way that is most likely to succeed. It's always going to be an outside chance, but if it's worth doing properly. And we are more than happy to help you on that journey. Over to you. Thank you. Do you want to sit there? Or
I can sit, I can stand. Is this, I think this is all.
You're welcome.
Oh, I'll stay sitting there if that's all right, thank you. I don't want to talk for too long because I think it's much more important that we hear from you and that we answer your questions. And I certainly can't compete with Susan when it comes to nuts and bolts, so I'm not going to give any statistics or anything like that at all. I'm here really, and I'll only talk for a couple of minutes, as an evangelist for bursaries. It was an incredibly important part of my own education, and it's the reason that I think I'm now working at Charterhouse and able to sit here and talk to you. So what I just want to touch on for a moment or two is why bursaries matter to a school like us and to other schools that are represented here today, and why I would encourage you as parents, even if it does seem like a very daunting journey, to take that journey and to see how far down it you can get. I don't know about you, but as a teacher whose other half is a casting agent, the sort of figures that Susan was mentioning at the start of her presentation are horrific and terrifying, and something that we will never be able to reach. And that was exactly the position that my parents were in 20 years ago. They knew they had a son who was reasonably musical, and they thought it would be nice for me to go to a school where music was valued and there was a significant music department, which very sadly in the area we lived in was not the local state school. In many areas it would be the local state school, and that's important to note, but it wasn't where we lived. And had I not won the music scholarship that I did to Winchester, I wouldn't have got the music scholarship I got to university, and I wouldn't have ended up teaching, and I wouldn't be able to talk to you now. So for me, this is an incredibly important part, I would argue the most important part, of what the independent school sector is about. It changed my life, and hopefully it can change some of your children's lives as well. There are two reasons to us as schools that this agenda matters. I know why it will matter to you as parents. It's because your children are wonderful people, and we want them for two reasons. The first is that actually we weren't set up to take the children of the very wealthy. Schools like Charterhouse were very clearly set up to take those who could contribute to the school and those who would benefit from the sort of education that we offer. And we want to get a little bit closer back to that mission. We've drifted a very long way from it. We still take children who contribute a huge amount, and hopefully children who benefit from what I believe is the wonderful education that we offer. But they are by and large from a homogeneously privileged background, and that is something we're actively trying to change. Bursary funding is the #1 fundraising priority for our school now. It comes above capital projects, it comes above rebuilding classrooms, it comes above the work that I do in terms of broad social responsibility. raising money for bursaries is our number one priority, because we want a more diverse pupil body. That is what our founders set us up to be. And the second reason, which relates to that, is that we are a better school if we have a wider mix of pupils. That is a fact. There is a huge amount of research which far brighter people than me would be able to quote you chapter and verse about, that proves very, very convincingly that schools with a diverse pupil body are happier schools where children are more productive and where everyone gets on better. I always tell our pupils at Charterhouse that they are going to go on, if they want to change the world. There is currently a Carthusian in the cabinet. He's in charge of the entire health service. There are Carthusians on the senior judge benches. There are Carthusians running FTSE 100 companies and leading other great schools. And what matters to us as a school is that the education we provide isn't just Latin and maths and physics, important though those things are, but is an education that prepares you for the outside world and that makes you think about the sort of person you want to be when you find yourself in that sort of leadership position as a grown-up. I say to them very bluntly, you are going to go on to earn far more than me and be far more important. And this, school days, is the time to think about what sort of person you want to be. Your children, and hopefully one day my children, will be better equipped to go on that journey if they mix with a wider group of children during those very impressionable teenage years. So my plea today is, however daunting the bursary system might seem, ring us up. And if we're not for you, ring Eton up, or Radley, or Ampleforth, or wherever you want your son or daughter to go. Because we want them, and there are lots and lots of ways of making the money work. Susan's absolutely right, of course, to say that not everybody is going to get 100% bursary. And there's no point pretenders that can happen. Would we like that to be our goal ultimately? Yes. Would we like to get back to being a school where we took whoever was best for the school that year, regardless of background? Absolutely we would. But our endowment at the moment, to be blunt, is not big enough to do it. In the meantime, bring us your children and let's see together if there's a way of us educating them, because it makes us a better school and hopefully it makes them better children.